Have you ever caught yourself scrolling through someone's life, their achievements displayed in perfect squares, and felt that quiet ache in your chest? That subtle, hollowing sensation that whispers you're somehow falling behind in a race you never consciously entered? We tell ourselves we've outgrown comparison, that we're secure in our own journey. Yet in the silence of 3 a.m. thoughts, we measure the distance between where we stand and where others appear to be. This isn't just a modern affliction born from digital windows into curated lives. It's an ancient human wound, this compulsion to place ourselves on an invisible spectrum of worth, to constantly triangulate our position in relation to others. What if this impulse, this seemingly inescapable habit of comparison, isn't merely a psychological weakness, but something woven into the very fabric of how we come to know ourselves? We begin our lives as mirrors, reflecting back what we see. Long before we form coherent thoughts, we're studying faces, mimicking expressions, learning through observation. Comparison isn't learned, it's inherited, a primordial tool for survival and belonging. Our ancestors needed to understand their place within the tribe, to gauge their standing, to ensure they weren't falling dangerously behind or stepping perilously ahead. Those who failed to properly compare risked exile, and exile meant death. This ancient wiring still hums beneath our modern consciousness. When you feel that pang watching a colleague receive praise, when your stomach tightens seeing an old classmate's success announcement, you're experiencing the echo of evolutionary programming. The fear that falling behind means falling away from the protection of the group. Your brain, in its primitive wisdom, treats social comparison as a matter of survival, flooding your system with the same stress hormones that once prepared you to fight or flee from physical threats. The digital age hasn't created this tendency. It has merely amplified it to unprecedented levels. We now carry in our pockets infinite opportunities for comparison, endless streams of others' highlight reels against which we measure our unedited footage. Each notification becomes a potential reminder of where we stand in relation to others, each scroll a subconscious tallying of our perceived value. The architecture of social media platforms isn't designed to soothe this ancient wound. It's engineered to exploit it. What makes this machinery particularly insidious is its invisibility. We rarely catch ourselves in the act of comparison. It happens in microseconds, in the spaces between thoughts, in the subtle shifts of our emotional weather. By the time we notice the heaviness in our chest or the tightness in our throat, the comparison has already done its work, altering our self-perception without our conscious permission. This unconscious nature explains why simple awareness doesn't free us. You can intellectually understand the futility of comparison, recognize the curated nature of what you're seeing, remind yourself of your own unique journey, and still feel the emotional impact. Knowledge alone doesn't rewire neural pathways that have been strengthening since before you formed your first memory. Perhaps most painfully, comparison steals the present moment. When you're mentally measuring the gap between yourself and others, you exist neither here nor there, suspended in an evaluative limbo that prevents genuine presence. The sunset isn't experienced for its beauty, but for how it might appear in a photo compared to others' sunset photos. The achievement isn't savored for its intrinsic value, but for how it positions you on an imaginary hierarchy. This constant positioning creates a peculiar form of self-alienation. You begin to see yourself not as you are, but as a collection of comparable metrics. Your appearance, your achievements, your possessions, your relationships, all externalized and evaluated against others. The authentic self becomes obscured behind this comparative framework, making it increasingly difficult to recognize your intrinsic worth, separate from how you stack up against others. And yet, paradoxically, this very mechanism that causes so much suffering once served as our primary pathway to self-knowledge. Before mirrors, before photography, before the written word, we understood ourselves primarily through the reflections we saw in others' eyes. Comparison wasn't just how we determined our social standing, it was how we came to know who we were. Nietzsche observed that when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes back into you. Comparison is such an abyss, a bottomless void that returns your gaze with unsettling questions about your worth. The more intently you peer into it, measuring yourself against others, the more it peers back, reshaping your very identity around these measurements. This is the existential trap that Sartre might have recognized. The way others become the mirror through which we construct our sense of self, surrendering our authentic existence to external validation. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard identified comparison as a particular form of despair, what he called the sickness unto death. Not a physical death, but the death of the authentic self. When we compulsively compare, we're not simply feeling momentary inadequacy. We're engaging in a form of spiritual suicide, sacrificing our unique existence for the comfort of knowing where we stand. We trade the anxiety of undefined selfhood for the predictable pain of comparative inadequacy. This philosophical dilemma extends beyond individual psychology into the realm of meaning itself. Viktor Frankl, having survived the concentration camps, came to understand that meaning cannot be found in comparison, but only in the irreplaceable nature of each person's existence. When we measure ourselves against others, we implicitly deny the fundamental premise that our life has unique meaning that cannot be quantified or ranked, that the value of our existence transcends comparative metrics. The existentialists would recognize our modern predicament as a particularly acute form of bad faith, a denial of our freedom and responsibility to create meaning on our own terms. Each time we surrender our self-evaluation to the metric of comparison, we abdicate the existential responsibility to define value for ourselves. We outsource the most intimate and essential task of human existence, determining what matters, to the collective judgment of others. Camus might see in our compulsive comparison a form of absurdity, the futile attempt to find objective meaning in a fundamentally subjective experience. No matter how precisely we measure ourselves against others, we can never escape the fact that worth and meaning remain stubbornly resistant to objective quantification. The person with seemingly everything can feel empty. The person with seemingly nothing can experience profound fulfillment. This absurdity reveals itself most clearly in the moving target nature of comparison. Have you noticed how achieving what once seemed the pinnacle of success, the job, the relationship, the home, the recognition, provides only momentary relief before the comparative mind finds new standards against which to measure yourself? This is what Schopenhauer understood about desire, that it can never be permanently satisfied because it's not actually about the object, but about the wanting itself. The philosophical tragedy of comparison lies in its fundamental category error, attempting to measure qualitative worth through quantitative metrics. How do you quantify the value of your unique perspective, the particular way you love, the specific quality of presence you bring to a room? These essential aspects of selfhood resist comparative measurement, yet we persistently try to reduce them to metrics that can be ranked and evaluated. Jung would recognize in our comparative suffering the neglect of the shadow, those disowned parts of ourselves that we project onto others, either idealizing them as having what we lack or denigrating them for embodying what we reject in ourselves. When we compare, we're often not seeing others as they truly are, but as screens for our own projected material. Our unlived possibilities, our disowned qualities, our abandoned paths. Perhaps most profoundly, Comparison represents what Heidegger called forgetting the question of being. In our preoccupation with how we measure up, we forget to ask the more fundamental question: what does it mean to be authentically ourselves? We become so entangled in relative positioning that we lose sight of the absolute miracle of existence itself, the sheer improbability of our being here at all, with our particular consciousness in this specific moment in cosmic history. Morning arrives. You reach for your phone before your eyes have fully adjusted to the light. A colleague has posted about a promotion. A friend shares photos from an exotic vacation. An acquaintance announces a relationship milestone. Before you've even risen from bed, before you've had a moment to connect with yourself, you've already mentally positioned yourself on multiple hierarchies of achievement, experience, and desirability. The day has barely begun, and already you're carrying the weight of perceived inadequacy. In the meeting room, you hesitate to share your idea, mentally comparing it to what others might offer, prejudging its value through the imagined assessments of your colleagues. Your contribution remains unspoken, not because it lacks merit, but because the comparative mind has already deemed it insufficient. Later, you catch yourself adjusting your language, your posture, even your breathing pattern to match those around you who seem more confident, more deserving of space. These micro-adjustments happen below conscious awareness, automatic recalibrations to maintain your position in the social hierarchy. The parent at school pickup casually mentions their child's achievements, and you feel that familiar tightening, the subtle panic of wondering if your child is falling behind, if your parenting is somehow lacking. The comparison isn't just about you anymore. It extends to those you love, creating concentric circles of anxiety that ripple outward from your core. You find yourself emphasizing your own child's recent accomplishments, not from genuine pride, but from the desperate need to establish comparable worth. In the quiet of your home, preparing dinner, you're mentally elsewhere, replaying a social interaction, analyzing how you were perceived, comparing your contribution to others. The vegetables you're chopping, the flavors you're creating, the nourishment you're providing. All of it happens on autopilot while your mind busies itself with the exhausting work of comparative analysis. The present moment, with its simple sensory pleasures and opportunities for presence, slips away unmined for its richness. The mirror becomes a battlefield where victories and defeats are tallied in the most intimate comparison of all, between the person you see reflected and the idealized version you carry in your mind. This ideal isn't static. It shifts with each image you consume, each person you encounter who embodies something you believe you lack. The gap between reality and ideal becomes a measure of your perceived failure, regardless of how unrealistic or externally imposed that ideal might be. Have you noticed how comparison creates a peculiar kind of double consciousness? You become both the subject experiencing life and the object being evaluated. At a concert, part of you is absorbed in the music while another part stands outside the experience, assessing how your enjoyment compares to others, whether your response is appropriate, whether your presence is justified. This split attention prevents full immersion, creating a chronic state of partial presence. The most painful comparisons often happen in the domains that matter most to your identity. The aspiring writer doesn't agonize over others' athletic achievements, but can be devastated by a peer's literary success. The dedicated parent may feel immune to comparison regarding career advancement, but be undone by perceived inadequacies in their parenting. Comparison wounds most deeply when it strikes at the heart of how you define yourself. What remains largely invisible is how comparison distorts your perception of others. When caught in its grip, you stop seeing whole, complex humans and instead see embodiments of specific qualities, success, beauty, confidence, connection, that trigger your insecurity. This reduction of others to comparative metrics doesn't just damage your self-perception, it erodes your capacity for genuine connection. How can you truly see someone when you're using them primarily as a measuring stick? Yet within this battlefield lies a subtle opening. Have you ever experienced moments when comparison temporarily falls away? Perhaps in flow states of creative absorption, in genuine connection with another person, in experiences of awe before nature's grandeur, or in the focused attention of helping someone in need. These glimpses reveal that comparison isn't our natural state, but an acquired habit, one that can be interrupted, however briefly, by full engagement with what's directly before us. What if, beneath the suffering it causes, comparison also contains the seeds of our liberation? Consider how the very pain of comparison reveals what matters most to you. When you feel that sting watching someone receive recognition for their creative work, it illuminates your own unacknowledged creative aspirations. When you feel envy at someone's easy social connections, it highlights your own longing for authentic belonging. The pain points to the path, to what your soul is asking you to honor in yourself. This recognition represents a subtle but profound shift from using comparison as a tool of self-judgment to employing it as an instrument of self-discovery. The question transforms from, "Why am I not like them?" to, "What does my reaction reveal about my own deepest values and unlived potentials?" This doesn't eliminate the discomfort, but it redirects its energy toward growth rather than self-diminishment. There exists a form of comparison rarely discussed, yet potentially transformative, comparing yourself not to others, but to your former self. This temporal rather than social comparison asks, how have I evolved? What have I learned? What strengths have I developed through my particular challenges? This inward-facing comparison honors the specific contours of your journey without the distortion of measuring it against lives built on entirely different foundations. The resilience within comparison also appears in those moments when you consciously choose inspiration over envy. There's a delicate tipping point where witnessing another's achievement can shift from triggering inadequacy to expanding your sense of what's possible. If they can do it, perhaps I can too. Not in the same way, but in my own way. This perspective doesn't deny the reality of structural barriers or privilege, but it refuses to surrender your agency entirely to circumstance. Perhaps the most profound resilience emerges when you begin to recognize comparison as information rather than indictment. When the comparative mind notes someone's greater financial success, deeper relationships, or more recognized achievements, it's not delivering a verdict on your worth. It's simply highlighting different choices, different priorities, different circumstances, different paths. The judgment comes not from the observation itself, but from the meaning you assign to it. This shift in meaning-making represents what Viktor Frankl identified as our ultimate human freedom, the space between stimulus and response where we choose how to interpret our experience. The fact of someone's success remains the same. Your interpretation of what that success means about you is where transformation becomes possible. This isn't about positive thinking, but about reclaiming the authority to determine what constitutes value in your own life. The resilience within comparison also manifests in the growing recognition of its fundamental incompleteness. When you compare achievements, you cannot simultaneously compare struggles. When you compare public recognition, you cannot compare private fulfillment. When you compare material acquisition, you cannot compare depth of meaning. The comparative frame, by necessity, reduces multidimensional lives to their most measurable aspects, leaving the most significant dimensions unaccounted for. This recognition gradually loosens comparison's grip on your self-worth. You begin to understand that the metrics most easily compared are often those least connected to genuine fulfillment, the aspects of life that bring the deepest satisfaction. the quality of your attention, your capacity for presence, your ability to find meaning in difficulty, your willingness to be vulnerable in love, resist comparative measurement precisely because their value lies in their uniqueness to you. As this understanding deepens, comparison begins to transform from a source of suffering to a portal of compassion, both for yourself and others. You recognize that behind the achievements you envy lie struggles you don't see, that behind the confidence you admire lies vulnerability you don't witness, that behind the connection you covet lies work you haven't observed. This doesn't erase the comparative impulse, but it softens its impact, surrounding it with a more complete understanding of the human experience in all its complexity. What begins to emerge through the cracks of comparative thinking is a radical possibility that your worth might exist independent of your relative position. Not as a comforting platitude or spiritual bypass, but as a lived reality that slowly takes root as you question the comparative framework itself. This isn't about achieving some perfect state of self-acceptance, but about glimpsing, with increasing frequency, what lies on the other side of the comparative mind. This glimpse often appears first in unexpected moments, when deeply absorbed in creating something that matters to you, when fully present with someone you love, when engaged in service that transcends self-concern. In these states, the question of how you compare temporarily dissolves, not through effort, but through absorption in something that matters more than your relative standing. These moments reveal that comparison isn't an inescapable prison, but a habit of mind that can be interrupted by full engagement with life. The awakening beyond comparison doesn't arrive as a permanent state, but as an expanding capacity to recognize when you've been captured by comparative thinking and to gently return to direct experience. Like learning any new skill, this capacity strengthens with practice, not through forced positivity or self-judgment when you fall into comparison, but through the patient cultivation of a different relationship with your own experience. This different relationship begins with a simple but profound shift. From treating comparison as a problem to solve to seeing it as a messenger to hear. When you feel that familiar contraction around someone else's success, instead of immediately trying to talk yourself out of the feeling, you might ask, what is this reaction trying to show me? What unlived aspect of myself is being illuminated? What fear is being triggered? This curious rather than corrective approach transforms comparison from an enemy to a guide. The awakening also involves a gradual reclamation of your attention. Each time you consciously choose to focus on your own path rather than measuring it against others, you strengthen neural pathways that support direct experience over comparative evaluation. This isn't about ignoring others or becoming self-absorbed, but about relating to others as whole beings rather than as measuring sticks for your own worth. Perhaps most transformatively, the journey beyond comparison involves reconnecting with the intrinsic value of your unique perspective. No one else perceives the world quite as you do. No one else carries your particular combination of experiences, insights, and sensibilities. This uniqueness isn't a consolation prize for not being better in comparative terms. It's the very essence of your contribution, the specific medicine that only you can offer. This recognition doesn't eliminate the practical reality that certain fields and endeavors involve evaluation and selection. Not everyone will get the job, win the award, or secure the opportunity, but it fundamentally shifts how you relate to these external assessments, from seeing them as definitive statements about your worth to viewing them as limited evaluations of specific skills or fit in particular contexts. Your value remains intact regardless of these outcomes. The awakening beyond comparison also reveals a paradoxical truth. that genuine connection with others becomes possible only to the extent that you release the comparative frame. When you're busy measuring yourself against someone, you cannot simultaneously be present with them in their full humanity. The dissolution of comparison opens the door to authentic relationship, where both you and the other person exist as ends in yourselves rather than as reference points for evaluation. What gradually emerges is not freedom from the comparative impulse, that ancient wiring remains, but freedom within it. The comparison arises, you notice it, you honor what it's showing you, and you gently return to the direct experience of your life as it is, not as it measures up. This is not a destination you reach once and for all, but a path you walk with increasing awareness, compassion, and trust in the inherent value of your unique journey. In the quiet hours when the world's noise subsides, remember this: your worth was never found in the measuring, in the endless calculations of more or less, better or worse. It lives in the unmeasurable, in how you love, in what you notice, in the quality of your presence, in your capacity to find meaning even in suffering. The comparative mind will continue its ancient work, scanning horizons for where you stand in relation to others. Let it do its work without surrendering your deeper knowing. You were never meant to be comparable. You were meant to be irreplaceable, not in some grandiose way that demands recognition, but in the humble truth that your particular consciousness, perceiving this particular world at this particular moment, has never existed before and will never exist again. The light you're seeking was never in the comparison. It was always in the incomparable mystery of your own existence, not waiting to be earned through achievement or validated through favorable comparison, but already present, already complete, waiting only to be recognized beneath the noise of measuring. Walk gently with yourself as you learn again and again to come home to this recognition. As the sun sets on our shared journey through these reflections, I invite you to hold this truth gently in your hands. In a universe of infinite stars, no two shine with the same light. Your particular constellation of wounds and wisdom, dreams and doubts, creates a luminosity that cannot be ranked or rated, only witnessed. Perhaps our deepest longing isn't to be better than others, but to be seen fully, without comparison's distorting lens. In those rare moments when you stand before the mirror and see yourself with compassion rather than criticism, when you move through the world without mentally positioning yourself above or below others, you touch something ancient and true, the quiet dignity of being simply, completely yourself. This isn't the end of comparison's pull, but the beginning of a more tender relationship with its presence in your life. As you close this video and return to your day, carry with you not a solution, but a possibility that between the endless measurements lies an unmeasurable worth that has been yours all along. In the soft space between heartbeats, between breaths, between thoughts, it waits for you, patient, complete, already whole. If something in this journey resonated with your own experience, I'd be deeply grateful to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of your own story with comparison felt seen or understood today? And if these reflections offered even a moment of clarity or comfort, consider subscribing to join our community of fellow travelers seeking deeper understanding of the human experience. New explorations of our shared psychological landscape arrive each week. Thank you for offering your most precious resource, your attention, to this exploration. Your presence here matters more than you know.